Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, and their organizations prepare for change and transformation. I'm your host, Tom Hood, the EVP of Business Engagement and Growth at the AICPA CIMA, the largest global body of professional certified accountants in the world. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of finance and ESG. Joining me is Dr. Jeremy Osborn, FCMA, CGMA, CPA, and the Global Head of Sustainability at AICPA and CIMA. Jeremy's the Global Head of Sustainability, having previously served as a senior leader with the Value Reporting Foundation, which consolidated into the IFRS Foundation on the 1st of August, 2022 to support the work of the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB. I hope that's enough acronyms to start us out. He was also named by Accounting Today as one of the top 100 most influential people in accounting this past November. Jeremy, say hello to everybody.
Hello to everybody.
I've been excited about doing this since you've joined us. I want to start with you and your journey to join us here, and talk a little bit about, tell the audience about your background, why you're excited to be here. Because I recall from our initial conversation where you made a point about this being a unique moment in time for us to reimagine what it means to be an accountant, and in particular, how ESG is playing a role in that reimagination. So tell us this story.
Yeah, it is. It's a terrifically exciting moment to be an accountant. And there's a whole heap of reasons why. Essentially, it's the confluence of the sustainability movement, which has been gathering momentum over many years, and the state of play of the accountancy profession. So I joined, as you said, the association in the summer of 2022 as the global head of ESG. After a career of about 15 years working in strategy and sustainability consultancy with big firms like Ernst & Young and Accenture. And during that time, really the sustainability movement has grown up and has become more professionalized and more mature. I think, as I said, it's that confluence of where sustainability meets accountancy, or ESG meets accountancy, which makes this moment particularly exciting and really projecting forward the years ahead. And the accountancy profession is a profession that has adapted to change over not just the decades, but the centuries. It's a very ancient profession. And these moments come along every now and again. And I think we're at one of those real inflection points in what it means to be an accountant.
Well, it's funny because this was a big topic at our Future Finance Summit held this past December. And the group of these large corporate CFOs that have come together with us, they've said, we think this is important because of the value partnering role they see for accountants, which I think you're alluding to, right? Is we're now at that inflection point where this puts us into the intangible world of actual value that's not always on the balance sheet or the income statement. And what these CFOs are saying is boards of directors are asking for it. A lot of investors are asking for it. And they want to seize the moment to actually use it to help make the businesses have even more value in the future and not just focus on the reporting, which would obviously be the logical place for the CFOs and accountants to focus. So they think it's an and. Yes, they want to be involved in that reporting just like they do for all the other core reporting requirements. But in addition, focus on that value part.
I really like that way of positioning ESG and sustainability because it roots it in real business concerns, particularly for the CFO. And you're absolutely right that the growing value of intangibles relative to the market value of a listed entity has been well documented. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is a complete inversion of this from intangible value being round about 20% of total market value in the mid-70s through to 2020, where intangibles are about 90% of market value. Now that's for a typical S&P 500. It doesn't apply to all organizations, but it's in general true. Now, a finance professional, particularly one who's working within a business, really the essence of their job is supporting their entity with value creation, value preservation, and hopefully the avoidance of value erosion. And if we think about value in terms of tangible and intangible, the tangible is very nicely and neatly encapsulated with what accountants do and what accountants are trained to do. But the intangibles are much trickier, and it's a much less developed area. And that's where a lot of the regulatory changes which are going on and the development, particularly around sustainability-related financial disclosures, helps with this, because it starts to create a system of how to initially conceptualize, and then having conceptualized it, to measure and then to manage that. And this is often positioned as sort of non-financial capitals, but that's a bit of a misnomer, because ultimately these other types of capitals, of course, fundamentally underpin the creation of financial value. So if you don't manage them and manage them in a sustainable way, then you will over time erode financial value. So it's really looking at the connectivity and the interconnections between these different conceptions of value. And the argument you put forward and that the CFOs were discussing earlier around the growing value of intangible to tangible is a way of positioning what we're talking about in language that's very familiar to accountants.
Yeah, and while we're on this topic, I want you to expand a little bit from your experience with the Value Reporting Foundation and its predecessor, I guess, right, the integrated IIRC. But talk a little bit about these multi-capitals and how you see that playing and connecting into the ESG conversation.
Well, let me start with the multi-capitals, and then I'll explain what's gone on within the sort of the broader system. So accountants are really trained to think very carefully and to manage one type of value, which is financial value. Over really the last 30 years, there's been a pretty impassioned debate, particularly amongst sustainability professionals, about whether that's the be-all or end-all of what a business or an entity does through its activities. And this idea of value creation has expanded to include other concepts of value. So the most important really is natural capital. So this is the starting point for all economic production, is natural capital in one form or another. Even if one's simply a professional services organization, requires natural capital to power laptops and transport to get to clients, etc., etc. There's also human capital, which obviously everybody is familiar with that concept. We have intellectual capital, and this is a broader concept than the rather prescriptive view of accountants that it's trademarks and it's patents, because intellectual capital would encompass, for example, know-how. You know, the stuff that we walk around with in our head that isn't necessarily trademarked or licensed in some capacity, but is part and parcel of doing business. And then there's social and relationship capital. And of course, all businesses are selling a product or a service to somebody else or something else. And that's part and parcel of doing business. So the idea of these six, and then the sixth capital, and it relates to the financial capital, is called manufactured capital. And one could think of a corollary there with sort of what's on your balance sheet. So it's stuff that's been made. You may own it, or you may depend on it. So perhaps you're a business with a factory. You own the factory, but you depend on the government, for example, laying roads and keeping safe transport links so that you can get stuff in and out of your factory. So that would also be included here. So that's the broader definition. Now, as you said, I joined the Association for the Value Reporting Foundation. The Value Reporting Foundation was only around for a year. It was like a sort of mayfly that burnt brightly in the sky. It didn't die. It was absorbed into the IFRS Foundation, which sets the international financial accounting standards, and now has the remit to set the international sustainability-related financial standards too. The Value Reporting Foundation itself was the product of a merger, and that was the merger of SASB, which any listeners to this podcast will be familiar with, particularly in the US. SASB was a Californian-based entity. And then, as you said, the IIRC, the International Integrated Reporting Council. Both of these were fairly small not-for-profits. They've both been around for about 10 years. One developed an international corporate reporting framework for reporting how an organization creates value over time using this concept of these 6 capitals. The other was a sustainability accounting standard setter that had created 78 industry-specific standards. Both were beginning to see global uptake in the standards on the one hand, the reporting framework on the other. And they're rather like a horse and carriage. Standards need a framework, corporate reporting frameworks need standards. So they came together, they created the Value Reporting Foundation. That's now owned by the IFRS Foundation. And the reason this is good is the consolidation in the system has reduced what was a crowded and, for those on the outside, a very confusing environment with, as he said, all these acronyms. Nobody is quite sure what they all mean. But we're moving towards a much simpler, more coherent system, and an international one being led by the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is a sister board to the International Accounting Standards Board, which sets the global standards for financial accounting.
So in that notion, that you did a great job of consolidating that alphabet soup a bit and explaining this new multi-capital world, which I think is a huge opportunity for accountants to jump on the value partnering piece, right? By understanding these intangibles, which we really didn't get much involved in the old days. So what do you think CFOs need to know now about where we are? Kind of give the quick recap of what should they be paying attention to?
So things are moving very fast. The pace of regulatory change is gathering momentum. There's been all sorts of stuff going on. So just some headlines. We have within the EU Parliament has recently agreed the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Standards. They come into force from 2024. We have the 2 exposure drafts from the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. They are expecting that these exposure drafts will become standards around about the middle of 2023. And then, of course, we have the SEC's proposed rule on climate-related reporting. So there's a huge amount going on. And the reporting landscape, if we just think about that for a moment, is going to change pretty fast. For that to work, organizations are really going to have to bring the same rigor to sustainability-related financial reporting. And I'm being very careful with my use of words here. I'm not saying non-financial reporting. I'm not saying sustainability reporting. But sustainability-related financial reporting needs to be done with the same rigor as financial reporting. And this is really ideal territory for a CFO to take responsibility for, and for their teams to start preparing this information initially for internal use, for external use as and when they're either doing that on a voluntary basis or they're required to by regulation, and for those who work in audit firms to be auditing and assuring it. So all of the core things that a finance professional is used to bringing to financial information needs to be brought to this new mix of sustainability-related financial information. So the underlying data controls, understanding the materiality of the information, producing it in a reliable, concise, consistently prepared manner, producing it at the same time each year. ISSB will require the information to be published at the same time as the main corporate financial report. So that's likely to be round about year end. So it's applying all of those skills to this slightly different mix of information. But that's really only part of the opportunity here for the CFO. So there's the whole risk management aspect, particularly as their organizations support the transition for them and their value chain towards a low carbon or a net zero production process, and all of the transition risks that may come with that. So there's a risk management element, which again, CFOs are used to managing risk. They often have the chief risk officer reporting through to them. It's applying all of those concepts, all of those internal controls, risk management processes, again, to a similar but a different area. In this case, obviously the transition risk from climate change. And then there's also the opportunities that come with this. And I think it's really important not to forget that we're not only talking about risk management, we're not only talking about this rather arcane world of sustainability related financial disclosures, but there's huge opportunity for businesses as the world gears up towards a net zero economy, which the received view is this is necessary if we're to keep climate change within 1.5 degree rise that was agreed at Paris in 2015. And the sums of money, of capital here are gargantuan. It's been estimated that for the world to transition to net zero would require an incremental investment of $50 trillion over the next 20 or 30 years. So that's not either or, this is incremental investment. So the sums involved are huge. So whichever way you look at it, there's an opportunity to be assessed and possibly seized. There's risk to be managed, and then there's reporting to be done. And that's all, I think, very exciting as an opportunity for the CFO and their teams. But ultimately, it gets back to this question of the CFO's role and the finance professional's role in understanding how value can be created, preserved, or erosion avoided over time. And if we redefine or rethink or reimagine what we understand value to be, then that fundamentally changes the nature of what it is to work as an accountant within business. And the nice thing that we have here is the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, has redefined what it means by sustainability. And the definition that they're now using of sustainability is the sustainable use of the resources and relationships that an organization depends on and impacts on within its value chain. Those resources and relationships are the 6 capitals that we've been talking about. So financial, manufactured, natural, human, social, relationship, and intellectual. And that expands the remit of the finance professional and the CFO. So it trebles it from 2 capitals to 6.
Yeah, which is exactly what our future finance leadership group and the summits we've had are asking for, right? They're all saying this idea of the chief future officer and a much more proactive role in value creation for the company. And we're already seeing that in many, many of these organizations. So that's awesome. Now, real quick, what about the recent pushback on ESG in the corporate environment? Certainly we're seeing it in the US. I know that's unique for the most part, but many of our CFOs say the push for ESG is driven by activist investor groups, board members, public company boards. Is this pushback a temporary or a sign of a growing trend?
Oh, that's a difficult question, Tom, but it's a necessary one to address. I'm very aware that in the US this is increasingly politicized down Republican Democrat party lines. My experience, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm based in the UK, so my experience is primarily UK and EU. Within the context of the UK and the EU, this is absolutely not a temporary temporary movement. It's a long-term systemic change to the nature of what it is to invest for long-term value returns. The evidence is very strong that organizations which strike the right balance between short-term financial returns in the form of share price accretion and dividends to shareholders with the longer-term necessity to build sustainable businesses and to manage these 6 capitals in a sustainable way outperform those who don't. And what the evidence suggests is that it leads to a lower cost of capital when organizations manage their businesses this way, that their institutional investors have a better understanding of their strategy, and how the complex interaction of all these different resources and relationships is being managed by the organization, where they have control over those or influence to create long-term value. And that in turn is leading the investors to increase their projections of future cash flows. So there's a real business driver behind this. ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations are important to any organization if they're thinking about how to maximize their opportunities to create value over time. And I mean, I draw it back, I think, to a very simple analogy, which is no business is an island. I think financial reporting has a tendency to think about a business as if it was an island, somehow isolated from society. Of course, it's not. All businesses are made by people, and their customers are people as well, somewhere along the line, even if there's lots of algorithms in between. But no person is completely isolated from the society around them, and businesses are exactly the same. I think all businesses depend on their management, sustainable management of the E and the S. Governance is to do with obviously the governance arrangements within the organization. So no, it's not temporary, and I would just, even for the cynics, I would just draw it back to that $50 trillion. It's an awful lot of money. One only needs a small part of that to secure the success, the future success of one's own organization.
Well, and the business performance stats. There's an economic reason to do this.
Exactly.
That's already been showing up. So I think that's a great way to summarize that. I also, real quick, can you cover some of the upcoming programs that we're working on to help CFOs, accountants, CGMAs, and CPAs get up to speed on all of this stuff?
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. I mean, we are the world's largest accountancy institute, so we have a responsibility not just to our members and the engaged professionals with whom we work, but to the accountancy profession as a whole, to support the profession in this area. So we launched a certificate in ESG fundamentals. It's about 10 hours of CPE accredited learning, and that's a great course for those who really want to sort of develop the basic understanding of ESG. We have 2 other really exciting opportunities that you'll be able to find out on our website. One of them is with the IFRS Foundation. This is the Fundamentals of Sustainability Accountancy Credential, and we're able to offer our members a discount for that. This has been around for several years, and really would help any finance professional who wants to understand how does this information get used by investors, and what is sustainability accounting itself, and what are the sustainability accounting standards that SASB created. They are the basis, by the way, for the industry-specific standards, which the ISSB is incorporating into its sustainability-related standards. So the first of these, that's topic-specific, is on climate, and if you go to that, you'll see the SASB standards. They've been internationalized to be accommodated into that. So the FSA credential, as it's abbreviated to, is a means of demonstrating that you have some professional expertise in how this information gets created and how it's used by investors. So we strongly encourage our members and others to take advantage of the discount we can offer them for this. And then the third, which we're very, very excited to be able to announce, is we formed a partnership with the Said Business School at the University of Oxford, and we will be developing various sustainability accountancy programs with them. We're going to start with an executive management program which is going to be terrifically high quality. Again, we really encourage anybody listening to this to go to our website to find out more about that. We'll be launching it later this year in Q3 this year. The Said Business School is now ranked in the top 20 business schools globally. The University of Oxford has been ranked the best university in the world for each of the last 7 years. So we're excited, they're excited about bringing AICPA and CIMA as the association into a partnership with the Said Business School at the University of Oxford. We're really, really excited about the opportunity to develop other relevant programs for finance leaders, for what I think of as the doers within the business. So those who are actually creating this information and managing businesses, and other executives and board level business leaders, etc. So those are our three main activities at this point, and you can find those on our website, AICPA.org website, and we have a section on climate change and ESG / sustainability.
And we'll drop that link into the chat channel here. But this was amazing giving us this update, Jeremy. We really appreciate it. For everyone, you can follow him on LinkedIn at Dr. Jeremy Osborn, JeremyOsborn. I want to thank you for joining me, and don't miss other Future Ready live sessions back here on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern. Jeremy, thank you again so much.
Thanks, Tom.